Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Williams, and in this week's episode, I was joined by Daniel Murray. Daniel is currently CEO and professional speaker at Empathic Consulting, where he helps leaders develop empathy as a key leadership capability and a strategic competitive advantage. He has created a process of empathy in leadership that enables leaders to become more consciously curious, explore for understanding, and lead with empathy and impact. Daniel shares this process through his many speaking engagements, workshops, and publications, and inspires leaders to build a high-impact culture that drives performance. I've been a follower of Daniel's content on LinkedIn for quite a while, and I love the insights and learnings that I get from it. All right, let's get into it. Here's my conversation with this week's Ops Innovator, Daniel Murray. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the Ops Innovator Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's really good to see you.
We're going to talk about developing great leaders and the impact those leaders can have on innovating and improving how organizations work. I've been a follower of your content for quite a while, and it's definitely helped me, improve my own leadership capabilities. So I know that our listeners are going to be able to benefit from a lot of what you have to say as well. I'd love to, before we jump into the meat of it, kind of start off, if you could share what the catalyst was and or what your journey was like to get to starting Empathic Consulting and understanding what an important part empathy plays in good leadership.
Yeah, sure. And look, it's maybe a different journey to what maybe some people expect. I started doing a degree in mathematics. It was my undergraduate degree, pure and applied mathematics, and spent most of my career in strategy and management consulting, largely within financial services. And right. I guess what happened in that journey is, like many of us, work on big projects, big programs of work, and things would go wrong. We wouldn't, projects would run over time, over budget. And I'd always ask, why? What's going on? From that mathematical point of view, very interested in how systems work and systems theory and what was missing, what was the thing that was causing these issues all the time. And one of the factors came up one day. I was speaking to a project manager, and he put together this beautiful Gantt chart, and I'm sure we've all seen them. And there was a row that said FTE, full-time equivalents, and right. I had a number of a number in there of the people who were going to be working on this. And I said to the gentleman who I was working with, what if they don't want to do the work? And he sort of looked at me a bit strange.
Like they have a choice, right?
Yeah, like what if they don't want to do the work? And he said, well, I don't know. We don't think about it. We just ignore that. And, for me, thinking about leaving motivation and desire and the passion and engagement in work out of the equation, it'd be like designing, a piece of machinery and saying, hey, look, let's just ignore friction because we can't measure it, or let's just leave it out. Just pretend it doesn't exist.
Absolutely.
It'd be nonsensical to do that. And so, what I know and what we all know is that some days we're a 1, we're motivated at that level. Sometimes we're a 1.5 or a 1.8. Yeah. Some days we're a 0.2 or a 0.3. And that variation is really what I became interested in. Why do people do what they do? What drives them? What are the ways in which we can form teams and cultures and leadership to help monitor, manage, and support that level of productivity and engagement in people? Because I think people's the big X factor in most of these big systems we work in.
It definitely is. And it's resonating with me so much because even though I do something very different than you, that where I started was the same way, right? I started in delivery and project management and worked up through consulting, but it was the same kind of thing of I'm having to deal with all of these things that really should be so much better. So I'm going to go find a way to fix it. I'm going to learn a new technique or a new thing. And it's just, there has to be a better way, right? And what you start doing is you start uncovering all the things that could be fixed. You start coming up with innovative ways to fix them. And you find that what you love is the process of making things better for others so they don't have to go through what you went through when you were a consultant or when I was doing delivery or any of those kinds of things. It's amazing.
Absolutely. And look, whether I work with school teaching associations or mining companies, engineering firms or banks, when you ask people what's the most challenging thing at work, a really high percentage of the time it's people. And,
Right.
Again, if we can get better at supporting each other and working with each other, it's going to make a huge difference.
How much of an impact do leaders really have on that? Is it 50-50? Is it, look, they do, but people are just people and it's how they are? Is there a noticeable and significant impact that just the way that you lead, and I'm not talking about leadership as in your position in a hierarchical chart. I'm just saying you're a leader in the business because people tend to follow you because you have good ideas and you get good work done and things like that. How much of an impact does leadership really have on the culture, the variation in people that you talked about, and just what it's like for people on the ground inside of a business?
Yeah, look, if you Google, there's that question. There's a whole bunch of studies that range in percentages about how much, and it's a very difficult question to answer empirically because. How much does anything influence you is something that is hard for us to really know. Our subconscious is very sensitive to a whole bunch of factors that we're not even consciously aware of. So when someone says, how much did that influence you, you're asking their conscious brain, but not necessarily the thing that drives the motivation. So let me just sort of preface it that way. The second thing I'd say, though, is I believe it's really big. I think, and you made a really good point, leadership is a verb, not a noun. Leadership is what you do. It's your behaviors, actions, the trust you build. It's those intangibles that you express between people. Those are the things that drive leadership. And having leadership within a group and having people who are there to support each other and help each other forward, that sort of leadership makes a huge difference on us. If we just think of innovation, for example, one of the biggest drivers of innovation. We could ask why innovation. I think that's probably a redundant question for your listeners.
Right.
But what are the factors that drive innovation? And some of the biggest ones are having curiosity. Being interested enough to ask those questions and to try and seek a better way of doing something. And curiosity flourishes in safe environments.
Right.
What happens to our brain when we feel unsafe, when we feel there's potential danger, when there's low levels of trust between people? What our brain does is it looks after itself. It looks after us and keeps us protected. And naturally, curiosity starts to shrink in those environments. So if you've got an environment where people are feeling safe, they're feeling like they can trust the people around them, and leadership is helping to propagate that sense of trust, it really opens up that sense, that ability for us to be creative and to have those curious questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've seen it too. Right. And this is where you could talk about leadership maybe in a more hierarchical sense, is that creation of safe environments, that does come from leaders, right? There's just no way around it. It comes from their own behavior. It comes from how they respond to things, how they present themselves in meetings and conversations and everywhere else. So I couldn't agree more that you want people to be innovative. You want them to be creative. You want them to think outside the box, if that's still a thing. It has to be something that, unfortunately, as much as we don't like to talk about top down, that's a top down thing, isn't it? That creating that safe space.
Yeah, it's sort of, where do we focus our attention? So if a leader at the very top is saying, hey, look, stop asking questions, just do what you're told, then naturally people are going to stop asking questions and focus. They're going to disengage. They're going to, this is where you hear the old, that's the way we've always done it before. And, when I've worked in really innovative organizations and probably teams within organizations more appropriately, when someone says that's the way we've always done it, you see them get excited because we must be able to change it. We must be able to make it better. If we've always done it that way, this is horse and cart stuff. Of course we can make it better. So they get excited by it. But when the leadership says, hang on, don't challenge, let's just keep it, do what you're told, it really shuts down innovation in a really powerful way.
Yeah. That kind of leads us perfectly into what I wanted to cover next, which is part of this, or part of the reason I started this podcast, is I want people to be focused on helping themselves, their colleagues, and their organizations create great working environments and think innovatively about how you might go about that. and you mentioned innovation, right? So I'd love to know, just when it comes to applying an innovative lens to leadership and how you then enable creative thinking in your people. What's your perspective on that? What does it mean to be innovative in a leadership role and to be able to enable that kind of thinking?
I think one of the mistakes people make in trying to be innovative in their leadership is they think they've got to have all the ideas.
Yes.
And, they probably, they very wrongly look at someone like a Steve Jobs or an Elon Musk and think, well, that they must be the epicenter of all the ideas in those organizations. And then everyone else just sort of catches the brilliance that falls off of them, and then they work stuff out. Whereas the opposite's true, isn't it? What they do is they inspire and create space for people to ask crazy questions, to try things, to get it wrong and be okay when they get it wrong, to challenge and push. I might get this a little bit wrong, but I'm pretty sure when Steve Jobs was first handed the pilot iPhone, or the working model of the iPhone, he didn't like it. He thought, really, no buttons? I'm not so sure. And, we all sort of credit Steve Jobs and iPhone and think that he changed the world. Well, actually, he could have easily, if he wasn't so open to being challenged, and if he was more autocratic, it might never have got off the ground. So, I think there's a humility that leaders need to have in that, if they want to create innovation in their teams. The other thing they have to do is take 100% responsibility when it all goes wrong, right? Because if you want to be innovative, things are going to break. You're going to stuff things up. It's it's part and parcel of trying and innovating. And again, if you're a leader who, when something goes wrong, particularly if you're in those sort of mid-tier levels of leadership, if something in your area goes wrong and you quickly try and protect yourself, throw someone under the bus, find someone to blame, then you'll shut down innovation in those people around you. Right. Because they won't take the risks. Whereas if you're willing to go up the chain and say, hey, look, I stuffed up. This is part of my team. It's my team who did this. We were trying. This is how it played out. But I'll take responsibility for the stuff up. But we're going to keep trying new stuff, and we're probably going to stuff up again. Let's talk about how I support my team through this. That's the sort of leader that creates this sort of wave of innovation behind them.
Yeah. And that just circles back to that safe space you were talking about, going all the way through the organization, doesn't it? Because the middle leader's not going to do it if the director doesn't do it, and they're not doing it because the GM doesn't, and they're not doing it because the group exec doesn't, and all the way up to the chair. Yeah. Right. So it does have to permeate the organization at all levels and at all times if you're really going to be successful in this kind of thing. Yeah. And how do you get, Are there real constraints on the top of the top, right, at an organizational level that makes it more or less difficult to adopt this way of thinking? Does it get harder as you go up the tree?
This is always a bit of a double-edged sword. Whenever you speak to people who work in small organizations and down low, they say it must be really easy at the top. And of course, if you talk to any CEO of a large organization, you'll notice their hair changes from sort of dark to grey overnight.
Or gone. Yeah.
Gone altogether. And so it becomes more challenging, I think, at the top, because you've got so many layers you've got to work through and try and sort of motivate and support. If I think of an innovator, maybe who's got a team of 20, all right, I can get them all in the room. I can get them in a room every couple of days, and we can have a chat, and we can build a culture, and we can support each other. And look, it might be challenging when I'm thinking about my investors and my board members and those sorts of people potentially. But again, if I'm really clear on my narrative, my purpose, why I do what I do, and people are buying into that, then there should be a level of consistency and expectation that fits. When you've got, say, a Matt Common or a Ross McEwen, you've got 30, 40,000 staff below you. As innovative as you might be, or as strong as you might build a culture in the people you influence, you just don't have the ability to talk to all of them. And so this is where I think at that senior, at that sort of large scale level, it's about how do I drive leadership down as far as I can. How do I think about the type of leadership behaviors that I want to see at the top table, and think about how do I get that down to a team leader in a part of the business? How do they sort of how do they mirror or bring to life those same leadership principles at that lower level? Because again, my experience, and I don't know if it's different for you, Scott, but a lot of innovation comes from frontline people saying, hey, why do we do this stupid thing? Have we tried doing this? Could we try something 100%. Different? And there's huge value there.
I would suggest that I'd take yours a little bit further and just say that most of it does. The meaningful innovation, right? And I'm not talking about innovation that is seen as the next big disruptive product that we launch. Sure, some of those ideas might come from people who have a broader view of the organization. But when you talk about meaningful innovation on the ground for the bulk of the people who have to work and live inside this beast of an organization, that is where it comes from, because they're living it every day. They're the ones going, oh, if only they would just stop this. I could do this in half the time and it would be so much better, and the customer would be happier and all of our employees would be happier. You'd save so much money, but no one will listen to me. And that's one of the tenets of lean governance in organizations, right? Is how do you empower all of your people? Yes, through leadership, but through practices and policies and frameworks and whatever else you need to put in place to be able to allow them to do experimentation, teach them how to do it safely, and just watch the innovation bubble up, right? And it will just be everywhere, and it'll be little, but it'll be meaningful, and it's so important.
100%. Those little things create. So there's two parts to this. The little things create huge compound change when you add them all up. The other thing I think we sometimes overlook with the little things is when you don't fix the little things, they create constant frustration for people. It's the pebble in your shoe. And if you've ever, you've been walking with the pebble in the shoe for a few minutes, it takes all of your brain's capacity not to just, to focus on it so hard, right? So if you want to have innovation, and I reflect back on a program of work I did a long time ago for one of the big banks in New Zealand. We had to reduce $180 million of cost out of their budget. It was huge. And one of the things I said was we have to focus on all the little things as well. Now, the little things aren't going to get us to the overall end state in any quick fashion. But if people are being stretched in something important over here, and yet they can see some really obvious stuff that we're not talking about, it just creates this sense of injustice. It's not fair. It's frustrating. And again, this has such a psychological impact on me that I go, oh, what's the point? Right. They're not really mean. It doesn't really make sense. And I think those little things make a difference. The other thing, just to touch on, and this goes for anyone in any size organization, as you're getting bigger, don't forget to go back to the front line, go back to the coalface and experience what's happening there. Working in insurance companies and banks, we would often take senior leaders to a contact center for a day, get them to put on a pair of headphones. They weren't allowed to talk to any customers.
Of course. No.
But listen to what's going on. Watch what your team members are trying to do there. And often the feedback is, oh my God, I can't believe how hard it is. I can't believe the experience of putting customers through, and, it just brings it all to life. And this is what, the idea of having empathy is all about. It's about understanding what's going on for people.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it completely leads us into, I think I mentioned, before we get into the meat of it. Well, now let's jump into the real stuff. Because, every company at some point makes the claim that they're either innovative or they're going to be innovative. It's usually in somebody's strategy somewhere, right? The word innovation shows up. But few actually get the mechanics right to enable it and support it. A lot of the things that you've already articulated for us now. And with Empathic Consulting, I imagine you get to see firsthand a lot of the challenges that leaders face in doing that, right? You've told us about a few of them. But without giving away all your IP, what what's standing in their way? Like, what's really stopping them from actually adopting that kind of mindset or exhibiting those behaviors as empathetic leaders every day? Is there stuff that just needs to be fixed?
There's probably a lot of things that differ in organizations, but one place to start, I want to try and give you something really practical rather than just talk in broad terms. A really simple question that I think you can always ask a particular leadership team. So let's say we're working with a senior leadership team at an organization.
Yeah.
The first thing I'll often ask them in a pretty candid way is, hey, how's your team going? Now, what I ask them, the reason I ask them that question is not to find out what they think how their team is going. I'm interested in who they're talking about when they mention their team. Now, what a lot of them will do, a lot of senior leaders in leadership teams, they'll say, my team are the people who report to me.
Right.
That's my team. And they'll go, oh, my team's great. Yep, we've done this, we've done that, we've worked hard, and yeah, we're going great. And at that point, I'll often pause and go, hang on, isn't this your team, the leadership team? Isn't this your team? And they'll often sort of have this strange look, I guess.
But they don't treat each other like teammates.
This is where that block is, right? Because when they don't treat each other like teammates, what happens? Well, what happens is generally they treat each other like competitors for scarce resources.
Yes.
There's an annual budget. There's only a certain amount of resources. Who's got the favor of the CEO or the board, whatever it might be. And when they see each other like that, they'll make decisions to look after their team, their people, instead of how can we work together to create a better organization. And as soon as you create that sort of that tension of I've got to protect my people, you create a level of defensiveness. You create a level of suspicion between organizational areas. And, if we think about where does a lot of the innovation really, really come from? It comes from these ideas that start in different areas of the business, coming together, forming a bit of, starting a bit, that spark sort of catching fire a little bit, and actually it all starts to work. It's about someone in the front, the service area, or maybe it's someone in complaints going, hey, we keep getting this issue coming in. And then someone in product going, oh, that's interesting. Wonder what's going on there. And then someone in marketing going, well, we're actually seeing this in the external environment. And these things fusing together to create some innovation that might move us forward. But when those three divisions work together through, you've got to fill out a form, or there's a formal process, or I don't know any of them. And actually, I saw them go on an offsite. How come they've got budget to do that and we don't? And, all of that animosity, we try and sort it out too often down there in the weeds. We go, we need a new communication model or a new well, actually, my view is the problem's at the top.
Yes. The
problem's at that leadership team table, that we're not talking in a way that is building, a team at this top table. And so, if I think about one practical thing a CEO could do, is, ask their senior leaders, hey, how's your team going? And just see who they talk about. And then ask that question, well, hang on, when we get together, aren't we a team? And how are we going? Do we have trust? Do we understand each other? Or do we challenge each other enough? When it comes to budget time, do each of you think, how can I stuff some money in a hollow log so we've got it next year? Or do we sit around and go, hey, this is our pool of resources. How are we going to deploy this to get the best outcome for all of us?
And it comes back to, I mentioned that, a few companies getting the mechanics right. And some of that, I think, could possibly be addressed or not possibly, but it could be addressed by, treating your team, right? Your leadership team, not only as a team, but putting in place a lot of the mechanics you put in place for who you thought was your team and all the people below you, right? So they're competing for resources most likely because their metrics aren't aligned, right? They have success to them is their success and their area's success, not the business's success. It's not good enough that Scott contributed to Daniel making a bunch of sales. No. He's an ops, right? There has to be, I have to show the costs went down. I can't just show that I made something better and therefore the product team was able to make a product better. The experience team could improve an experience. Anything, doesn't matter what it is. The misalignment of metrics drives that bad behavior, at least in my view, right? Which leads to that competition for all the resources that you talked about.
Yeah, and it can, and this is where culture and strategy need to be really tightly aligned. So
Yes.
a lot of organizations will talk about, oh, we have to, we build a strategy, and when I'm thinking strategy, I think we push that into those operating model elements you mentioned there. What are our KPIs? What are the processes? How do all these pieces fit together to form this strategic operation? The mechanics, the machinery in our business, in our organization. But alongside that and running parallel, what are our values? How do we make decisions? What do we care about? There's often a little 2x2 I like to show people, and it talks about the objective versus the subjective ways that we make decisions. So things can be objectively legal, illegal, inside rules, outside rules. But if we then perpendicular that with things can be right and wrong, you start to get some interesting things happening. Because sometimes inside an organization, something was within the rules, but it's wrong. It's not the right thing to do. It fits in the rules, but it's actually not what we should be doing. And I know the banks caught a lot of this during the Royal Commission. They were inside the rules, but actually the behaviour, the conduct was unacceptable conduct. And if you just focus on the strategy and the rules, you're always going to find these gaps open up because the world's too complex. You can't write enough processes, rules. You can't. But as much as I think we have to really work hard to get the KPIs aligned, you're never going to get them perfect.
Right.
And so the other question we've got to ask ourselves is, what are the times when, even though it's not within the rules, it's the right thing to do? And how do you make that judgment call? And this is a fascinating area, and we might talk about this more a bit later, but this is where, when we think about how AI is going to help us and support us, it will be very good at helping us when we say this is inside and outside the rules. But if you ask it about a moral dilemma, if you ask ChatGPT to solve a moral dilemma question, it just puts up a hand. It says, I don't know. There's no answer to this. Here are some things you can think about, but I can't make that decision. And this is where humans, leaders in particular, need to have that sense of value and purpose. And, if sitting across the leadership table, I really want to make sure that this person here is going to make a decision in a similar way to the person across the table when it comes to those grey areas, those ambiguities. And this is where, again, values and culture have to be really tightly defined, supported, constantly talked about, and they have to meet and line up with those elements of your strategy.
You just triggered something, and I know this is probably going a bit off script, but I just have to ask. When you talk about decision making, because I too believe, that's such an important part of just the day to day. Who's been given the awesome responsibility to make this decision, and what information can we provide to them to help them make the best one they can? And you talked about decisions aligning, right? They make similar decisions. They understand the context. They understand the strategy. What is your view on, when you get to that leadership level, that decision-making process? Is it something like, you're the expert in this field, we are going to defer to your decision? Now, I'll give you my view and I'll try to provide as much information as I can, but we're going to defer to it. And even if I don't agree with it, I'll support it because it's your decision to make. Or is there some other responsibility to get more consensus, to influence more, or is there some other thing in between those?
It's an interesting one, and again, I'd love to say there's an easy answer for decision making. It's probably one of the most challenging things that we have to do in organizations. I will pull out a few sort of thoughts. When I work with particularly teams, when you form an informal team together and ask them to make a decision, even if you appoint someone as the CEO, their language will almost always be, we decided.
Right.
And when you actually sit with them and watch how they make a decision, one of the things they often do is a vote. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but there is almost zero companies in the world that are democratic. Zero, right? For some reason, we think
Right.
it works perfectly for countries, but very few. Like you would never expect the head of Westpac to go, "All right, we need to make up a new strategy. We'll just put it to a vote." Like it's almost like a crazy. And the reason why we don't do that is because we intimately understand that there are different levels of expertise and knowledge in different parts of the organization to make good decisions.
Yeah.
So I think we have to accept that some people have more information, more knowledge in certain areas. Having said that, we also have to accept that most of the decisions that are based on just past and existing knowledge, they're not that hard to make.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Actually, and if we're making new challenging decisions only based on past information, well, that's dangerous. So I think what we have to do is say, yes, let's respect that there is past knowledge and information. But I think as a leader, I want to collect as much of that as I can. And then I need to think about what's the environmental context that might be different now than it was then. Right? Because if the world's changed a lot, there's a whole bunch of things that were okay back then that aren't okay now. We know that. You don't have to go far to find examples. Okay, great. So the context has changed. How can I get some more information on how these two things might fit together? How do I bring the right people together and then maybe how do I get different views who can challenge those and go, oh, hang on, I see it differently again. Now, at the end of the day, what we have to do in decision making is try and collect as much data as we can.
Yeah.
And then at some point, we just have to make a decision. And we have to have the humility to believe that that decision is the best decision that we could have made now, but is quite possibly wrong, and that we might have to adapt.
Yeah.
And look, there's Ray Dalio's got a great TED talk where he talks about sort of the way they make decisions at Bridgewater Capital, and everyone's got a voice, but again, it's weighted based on expertise, and that's a way they do it. It's quite confronting, and some people find it quite challenging. But let me give you a really simple way, I guess, tool that might help in a team situation. I see this quite often. A leader will get their team together and say, okay, team, we need to decide. Here's the situation. We need to decide between A, B, or C. I think it's A. What do you think? Now, psychologically, what they've done is anchored the team around A.
Yes.
The right answer is A. And if you're going to say anything other than A, you're at risk, potentially.
Absolutely.
And so what happens there is trust becomes very important, and it can become a bit psychologically dangerous to challenge. The second way they go about it is similar. Okay, team, we've got to decide between A, B, and C. What do you think? Now your extrovert will jump in and say A, and then again they've anchored, and there's a different relationship piece going on. People will look at you after the person said A. What do you think? There's a whole bunch of things going on. And so what we're not getting at the moment is good, useful information, diverse information. So a really simple thing to do is same setup. Okay, team, here's the situation. We need to choose between A, B, or C. What I'd like you to do is each spend 2 or 3 minutes in silence, write down which of the A, B, or C you think it is, and 2 or 3 bullet points as to why. That's it. Just write it down on a piece of paper. And once we're finished, I'm just going to ask each person to read out what they've written down. And what you'll find is early on people will go, oh, look, I think I might have got this wrong, but I thought this. And suddenly you'll get so much more data and diversity in that conversation. You get more data to make a data-driven decision, and it will be diverse, and it will be, challenging and interesting. Yeah. And that's what we need to get out of people is more diverse thought and different ideas.
And I wonder, and I'm probably taking this too far or making this too fuzzy of a concept, but we'll give it a go anyway, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Because just before we started, I wanted to look it up, so I just Googled, right? What's the definition of empathy? Right, I just wanted to see what it says, right? And it came up with ability to understand and share the feelings of others. But as you were talking, that definition just popped into my head around, the extroverts will do this, the introverts will do this. So if I'm a leader and I brought my team into a room and I'm going through the exercise that you just talked about, it almost seems like there was a little bit of, I have to understand that there are different personalities in the room that are going to respond very, very. Some people will just like to challenge me because they just love to, cause problems and they like to stir things up. Others are going to want to please me because they think that's the right thing to do. And others are just, they need time to reflect. So taking an empathetic approach to just how you treat people and how are they thinking and feeling at that moment, or how might they be thinking and feeling in that moment, and what's the best way for me to create an environment where everybody can feel safe to open up and participate. Sorry, it's probably a much too fuzzy a version of that concept, but it just was resonating with me as you were going through that recommendation.
It's 100% critical that as a leader, you have to understand your people. So the definition I use for empathy is even more simplified. It's just understanding why people do what they do, what drives people. What are the drivers that cause them to do things? One of the things I would often challenge when it comes to the definition of empathy, people often say it's walking in someone else's shoes. And I want to challenge that because when I walk in someone else's shoes, I have my experience in their situation. I don't have their experience. Yes. And really empathy is just about their experience. So as someone who likes to think on their feet and likes to whiteboard and come up with ideas in a room, I might think, well, this is a great way of getting great ideas on the table. But having worked with and knowing lots of more introverted people, their idea of getting put on the spot is horrible. They don't. It's not that they don't like it. It's just you won't get their best ideas.
No.
And so if I know I've got some of those people coming, I might say to them, hey, this afternoon I want to talk about this, and this. Just to give you a heads up, have a think about it. Love your best ideas when you come in the room, and for you to share them in the way that's going to be best for you.
Absolutely.
Now, if you don't, and again, people go, well, how am I supposed to know what my people like? Well, if you don't know what your people like and how they work,
talk to them.
Absolutely. Spend the time to go and understand them. It'd be like if you've got a piece of machinery and it's really critical, you want to know if it's working or not working. What are the conditions upon which it's going to work best and not work best?
I love that.
You look at the manual and work it out, and you talk to people. How do I, get the best out of this piece of machinery? Well, why wouldn't you do that for the more expensive resource, who has all the creativity and genius in the world sitting in their head? And we treat them like they're all going to be the same. It sort of doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. And you're spot on, right? Because I would be the person who would be asked, I'm a reflective thinker, right? Who probably straddles that boundary between introvert and extrovert, and it's contextual. It depends on where I am and what I'm doing and who I'm with. But I would be the person who would very much appreciate a bit of a heads up, a chance to think, just think, right? Do I have to immediately write something down on a sticky note and put it on the wall, or can I have a minute just to think this through before I write something down or before I contribute my opinion to a decision that you were talking about earlier, whatever that is? It would be invaluable to someone like me, and I don't think I would be alone. So finding that balance of how you can engage everyone in the right way, even if it, and I love that analogy of the manual, right? Just talk to them, find out how they work, know in advance who your people are. It's great.
And look, you can do this. There's psychometric testing. I use team management systems, which does this really well. The thing I always say, though, with psychometric testing of any sort is you are not a Myers-Briggs 4 letters. You are not a D or an I or an S or a C or any of the other. You're not that simple. You are far more complex. Everyone is.
Yeah.
Introvert, extrovert is not a binary. It's a spectrum, and it's contextual, as you said, and it changes over time. And there's a huge amount of complexity in the human beings. We're amazing, but we've got to spend, as leaders, we've got to spend the effort to understand each other more. And particularly what we sort of default to, and I get this quite often, people say, I'm very empathetic, and what they mean is, I'm good at understanding people like me.
Like you, yeah.
Well, that's not really that hard. That's not the challenge of our world. The challenge we have in our world today is, how do I understand a person who is nothing like me? How do I understand my competitor, my enemy, the person who sees the world, at the other end of the scale? Because if I can understand them more, then I can find what brings us together, and then we can be fruitful together, and we can support each other. But what we tend to do too often is dig trenches and throw rocks at each other, and
Yes.
rally our friends together and rally against whatever else we disagree with.
I love it. Such great advice. So tell me, what exciting things do you have coming up with Empathic Consulting that you might like to share with our audience?
Yeah, look, I sort of alluded to it earlier. One of the things that I think is going to be a big shift for us all as humans in this next sort of era is going to be thinking about empathy ethics in decision making.
Okay.
Because as AI and machine learning and automation continue to do the stuff that we know how to do, and keep sort of iterating on that, what's going to spit out, the exceptions that keep spinning out are going to be these ethical dilemmas, these moral dilemmas, these grey areas where we don't know if it's the right or wrong thing to do. It's going to be dealing with something that is logical but unfair. I'll give you an example. Yeah. Policies are a really good way that this creates issues in organizations. So if you had a policy that said, and I've seen this in organizations, we have a bereavement policy, and that means if an immediate family member passes away, you get leave. Okay, that sounds fair, sounds good. Now, Bill's auntie passed away, and aunties don't fit inside the bereavement policy.
Right.
But Bill's auntie raised him because his parents had passed away when he was really young. Now, as a leader, as an individual who leads Bill, do I say, sorry, Bill, it's outside the policy, get back to work? Or do I say, actually, the intent of the policy is to support people when someone really close to them has passed away? This makes sense. Go for it, Bill.
Go do it. Yeah.
And then have the courage, if you like, to when someone turns around and says, oh, well, my auntie died and I haven't seen her for 20 years, but I want to take time off too, to say, actually, no, that doesn't fit. That's not inside the intent of this policy.
Yes.
And so if we leave it to a computer, we leave it to AI and machine learning, it's going to struggle to make those nuanced calls. Now, as soon as you say no to Bill, what do you think happens to Bill's motivation, engagement, and commitment to the team?
Absolutely.
And so this is where leaders are going to spend more time here. And this is why I'm fascinated by how do we help leaders to make those decisions, to navigate those muddy and gray areas.
There's a correlation there on the ops side of things. Usually when we talk about designing good processes, right, we like to talk about as principle-based processes. And it's exactly the same thing, right? Does this adhere to the principle of how this process was designed, not the step-by-step instruction that's written and stored in a Visio map somewhere? The principle of it is this, and as long as you're meeting the principles, you're fine, right? Similar kind of thing. I understand what the policy is. I know what the intent was behind it, and I have the courage to apply it in appropriate ways.
And so it does get hard, though. I'm sure you're probably familiar with the old trolley problem.
Yes.
Right? So there's a trolley going down a railway track. It's going to slam into 4 people and kill them. The only thing I can do is pull a lever. The lever will change tracks, and it'll hit one person and kill them. Should I do it or not do it?
Yeah.
Now, if the principle is try to do as little harm, let's say that's the principle is let's save as many lives as we can. Okay, great. Then you should probably pull it. It'll kill that one person. What if that one person happens to be Anthony Albanese? Now, well, do you value that life more or less? It depends on your political persuasion, right? Or if it's Donald Trump, right? Okay,
that's right.
You can't pull it twice. But but what if it's a little kid? Right. What if it's your little kid?
Yeah.
Now it all gets messy and tricky, and this is again why I get really excited about this area. Not because I want people to die by hitting by trolleys, but because this is what we're going to have to contend with. We're going to have to train people and teach people and have conversations around how do we make these decisions? How do we navigate these muddy waters? Because it's going to be what's going to be left for us to do. when everything else is getting automated really quickly.
Look, I've taken up way more of your time than I intended today. Really apologize for that, but it's been such a great conversation. Yeah. Links to Empathic Consulting and for contacting Daniel about speaking engagements will be available in the show notes. But thank you so much, Daniel, for being this week's Ops Innovator. It was really great speaking with you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Scott, for having me.
Ops Innovator is produced in Sydney, Australia by 10% Labs. Our purpose is to engage thought leaders from all backgrounds, industries, and professions to explore what it takes to be truly innovative in how people and organizations work. From operating models and organizational structures, through policy and process to ways of thinking and working, it's about doing things differently and bringing the future forward to make things better now. The opinions shared by the host and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of any organizations with whom they may be associated. If you would like to recommend someone as a future guest to share their experience and expertise, visit us at 10percentlabs.com. Until next time, this is Scott Williams, encouraging you to keep looking for ways to do things differently so you can do them better.